There we go. Yeah, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, members and members of the public, officers. Welcome to the Planning Policy and Built Heritage Working Party on Monday, the 13th of September. I just want to remind everyone on the call, it would be helpful if you are able to mute your mobiles or turn them off if you prefer. And if you would go offline on the video until such time as you're invited to address the committee this morning. That just helps with the smooth running. Anyone, of course, who is substituting for an absent member may, of course, maintain their video link. We've got no problem with that. Just so that people who are perhaps not familiar with the role and the purpose of the Working Party are aware, what we do is we formulate policy and recommendations which go to Cabinet for approval. We are not the final decision makers in the business that we conduct. The next Cabinet meeting is on the 4th of October, and whatever is decided by Cabinet will then be ratified in the full council meeting later on in, I think it's November actually. I don't think there's full council in October if my memory serves me correctly. So that's just to confirm what we do for the benefit of those who are perhaps not aware of the purpose of the Working Party. If I can then turn to the agenda, can I start, Linda, with apologies for absence? I believe we've got Councillor Jeremy Punchard and Councillor Clive Stockton. And for Councillor Punchard, we have Councillor Angie Fitch-Tillett substituting. And for Councillor Stockton, we have Councillor Wendy Fredericks substituting. Is that correct, or is there any other information I need to be aware of?
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Item 2, I'm proposing that we defer public questions until item 7 to follow on from the introduction by the officer, Mr. Ashwell, so that we cohesively deal with the issue of both the site allocations under that agenda item. I think it makes for a more inclusive and formatted meeting. So that's what I'm proposing to do as regards public questions. I believe we have one speaker in favour of the site at C10, Clifton Park, and we have a statement from an objector which will be read out during that agenda item. So moving on to the minutes of the last meeting. These were omitted from the agenda papers. Those keen-eyed amongst you will have realised. They have been circulated this morning by email. And can everyone confirm that they had the chance to read them? Has anyone not had the chance to read them? Right, thank you. Yeah, I can see. Can I just ask Linda if we are in order approving dealing with the minutes if not all the members have read them? Can you just guide me on the procedure? I'm quite happy to defer it to the next meeting if it presents a problem.
Yes, it will be all right if there's a majority of members that are able to verify them. Right.
Well, my slight logistical difficulty is that I don't have access. I've not got a second screen and haven't had the opportunity to print them off. So can you lead us through the minutes, please? Can you go through page by page?
I think, Chairman, it might be best, as there seems to be some discussion about whether members have read them, whether we just take them through to the next meeting, if you prefer. I mean, it's a working party, so the minutes are there. I think that, you know, we'll just take them through and take both sets to the next meeting for sign off. I think that's probably the easiest thing to do.
Yeah, that works for me. I think that's the more appropriate course to take. Emma, thank you very much for that. So we'll deal with those at the next meeting in October. So moving on to item 4, items of urgent business. Do we have any items, Linda?
I'm not aware of any. I don't know if Mark has got anything. He's shaking his head.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much for that. Item 5, declarations of interest. Do we have any pecuniary or other interests to declare in accordance with the guidance on pages 1 and 2 of the agenda? Please raise your hand if you have. I don't see any hands raised at the minute.
Chairman, I think it's worth noting that I think all members have been lobbied extensively by both residents and a developer. That should be taken note of.
Yes, quite. Thank you, Councillor Heinrich. Quite happy to propose that. We have had significant volumes of messages over the last week about items on the agenda under item 7. So moving on to item 6.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Sorry, you missed my hand.
Sorry.
The land at Pine Tree Farm, or behind Pine Tree Farm, the other Cromer site, the landowner is a friend. However, I have not been lobbied. We have entered some discussions in the past and had a site meeting to just look at a few issues. But I don't feel that I have been lobbied and that I am perfectly clear in my own conscience that I am able to proceed.
Okay, thank you very much. That's duly noted. Thank you very much, Councillor Fitzgerald. So moving on to item 6 on the agenda, the update on matters from the previous meeting. I believe there is one matter which I will hand over to Officer Mark Ashwell to introduce at this stage, if I may.
Yeah. So thank you, Chair. So at the last meeting, members might recall we had a discussion about the categorisation of Haysborough as one of the small growth villages in the local plan. And I referenced, as it happens incorrectly, the fact that the local shop and post office had shut. And as a consequence, Haysborough no longer met the criteria for such a designation. And I recommended that it be deleted from the list of small growth villages. Subsequently found out, and apologies for this, the shop is not shut. Apparently it is still trading. The post office is still open. The premises are for sale, and we do have a planning application as yet to be determined for change of use of the property back to a residential house. Now, the reason why I'm going to ask you to reverse your previous decision is I understand there is some local interest in relation to purchasing the property as a going concern. So that suggests that, you know, at least a reasonable prospect that the shop and the post office might continue, or at least have a stay of execution. The dilemma being we won't know that until the planning application is resolved. As I say, that's still held in abeyance and not yet determined. So what I'm going to recommend to you is that actually you delegate that decision to myself, the chair, in consultation with a local member, and we make that decision as late on in the plan preparation process as possible and have regard to the circumstances at the time. So if the planning application has been resolved, if the potential sale has fallen through or has proceeded, we will know that hopefully by that time, and we can make an up-to-date decision. I don't think it's a matter that collectively the working party need be involved in, because whether the village qualifies or not is essentially a matter of factual interpretation of the methodology. There's not a lot of discretion in it. It either meets the qualifying criteria or it doesn't at the point of decision. So given that you did actually make a decision at the last meeting, I'm asking you now to essentially sort of reverse that and leave the final decision to be made under delegated powers at a later date. So I think that will need a vote, Chair.
Sorry, I'll unmute myself. Apologies. Thank you very much for that clarification, Mark. So the recommendation, perhaps I ought to say, do any members of the committee have any comments to make upon that? Any observations before we? Right, that's fine. I'm just checking everyone across the screens. Right, so the recommendation is that we reverse our decision on the 16th of August to remove Happisburgh from the list of small growth villages and to defer making any decision until future meetings when we know the outcome of various events which will clarify the situation in relation to Happisburgh. So that's the recommendation. Can Councillor Gay?
Just to say, Chairman, I think Mr. Ashwell has asked for us to agree a delegation as well. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, that's correct. Yeah. Sorry, yeah, sorry, not bring it back to a working party in the future, but to allow the decision to be delegated without bringing it back to the working party. Quite correct, Councillor Gay. Thank you very much. So that's the recommendation. Can I ask for a vote by a show of hands? All those in favour, please raise your hand. Yeah, I think that appears to be unanimous. Am I correct in that, Linda?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think that looks,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for that. So moving to item 7, local plan site allocations for Cromer. These are the remaining allocations to be considered to deliver what we hope will be between 500 and 600 properties for Cromer over the plan period for the next 15 years. That's worth remembering that it is that length of time. So I'm not going to say very much more about it at this stage. If I may hand over to you, Mark, to introduce this this item for me. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Chair. So what I propose to do is present the entirety of the site selection process for Cromer in one go. So I'm not present the two sites or the two principal sites separately. I'll try and wrap up a sort of single presentation. I'm going to start with a little bit of introduction to the plan making process, where we are in Cromer, what's gone on before. I'm not going to do a huge amount of presentation on the individual sites because you're now very familiar with these. You've seen them several times. There's a very comprehensive report in front of you. I know you've all had correspondence and been lobbied by various groups as well. So I'm going to rely largely on the appendix in the back of the report, which is very lengthy, which has got a lot of the technical information in it. And there's also a map of the various options, the site options on page, I think it's 117 of the papers, which if I can fumble with the technology at some point, I'll try and get that up on the screen. So when I'm referring to sites, there's actually a plan on the screen. But if you've got access, it's page 117 in the papers. So I think it's important to just understand the process or the stage of the process that we're at now. So we're about to publish what's called the Regulation 19 plan. that is the plan which the council is content to submit for examination. So it is largely the finalised plan. But before it goes to the inspector for that examination, it is subject to one further round of public consultation. So those who are discontent with any of the content get the opportunity to make further submissions. Unlike the previous round of consultation, it's no longer a beauty contest at that stage. It's not a consultation about a range of options. You're not seeking opinions on lots of different choices. You are seeking formal comments on the plan you intend to submit. And those comments have to be linked to one of the formal tests of soundness, which are embodied in the regulations. The importance of making that point is that once the Regulation 19 consultation phase is finished, the council can and probably should review the representations so it understands what people are saying about the plan. And it is able to, at that stage, schedule modifications and invite the inspector to consider those modifications if it chooses to. So if we are persuaded by the Regulation 19 representations that our plan is indeed unsound, the process from that point forward would be to schedule modifications and invite the inspector to consider those modifications through the examination process. It's not the process to modify the plan sort of unilaterally. The modified plan in front of the inspector, you have to schedule a list of modifications. So that's where we are. So I was just going to set the scene about the plan overall and say a little bit about the context for Cromer, in particular around the numbers, because I know you've been lobbied on the numbers and there's some questions about where the numbers are derived from and what they mean. So I'll explain that. So we're producing a plan which overall sets as an absolute minimum requirement the delivery of 9,400 homes over the entirety of a 20-year plan period. And I'd emphasise the absolute minimum, that is the number, the 9,400, is the floor below which I would not advise you go. So you should regard that as I say, the bottom line in terms of delivery. Because local plans shouldn't aim to deliver just the minimum, they should include buffers and contingencies and a bit of flexibility. Your proposals to date, the ones you've identified so far, if you make decisions today in Cromer, would deliver actually about 11,000 homes. So quite a bit more than the absolute minimum. And that's really important in terms of the overall soundness of the plan. If we sat down in front of an inspector and said, we've just done the bare minimum, I think I'll be back in front of you in a few months' time, persuading you to do a little bit more. So we've got a minimum target to be delivered and a plan that delivers quite a bit more. In those overall numbers, the allocations, the bits that I'm asking you to look at and say, let's allocate these sites for development, they only represent about half of the growth. And I think that does create some confusion amongst particularly members of the public when they see us throwing around figures like 600 houses in Cromer. They believe that is the entirety of the growth that is being proposed in the town, and it's not. The 600 figure relates to allocated sites, those we specifically identify for development. The remaining half of development over the planned period, some of it's already been built. So our planned period starts in 2016. So everything that's already been built counts against that minimum target I explained earlier on. And then we make allowances for windfall developments. You know, these are the small scale developments year after year after year. We don't know where they will be, but we know we will have some, and we have a calculated allowance for that embodied in the overall total. So what I'm saying there is the 600 figure is allocations. And it's important to get somewhere close to that 600 in order to get somewhere close to the 9,200. You know, there's a relationship between the two. Cromer is identified as a large growth town, and it sits at the highest level in our settlement hierarchy. So it sits up there with North Walsham and Fakenham. It's the third large growth town. And it's a large growth town, largely because of what I'm going to describe as its functional sustainability. It's got lots of services, you know, shops, hospital, our own services that we provide from the district council offices, health and so on. If you look at its functional sustainability, it compares very, very favourably with the other large settlements in the district. It's got very high levels of housing need. I'll caveat that housing need remark with the fact that housing need is sometimes an expression of preference. So those people on the housing register that are in housing need are given the opportunity to express where they would like to live. And of course, because Cromer is a seaside town, then you would expect to see quite long lists of people waiting for affordable housing in places like Cromer. But it has a high level of need compared to some of the other settlements in North Norfolk. But the difficulty, and I think the dilemma, which is encapsulated in the discussions you're about to have, is it is environmentally constrained. It is obviously next to the North Sea. That's a wet bit you can't build in. And it is surrounded by the Norfolk Coast AOMB. Largely all of the sites, with one notable exception, fall within the AOMB designation. And because of the constraint, Cromer has been earmarked in the settlement hierarchy for substantially less growth than North Walsham or Fakenham. So if you look at North Walsham, we're proposing about 2,200 houses on allocated sites. In Fakenham, we're proposing about 1,500 houses on allocated sites. In Cromer, we're proposing about 600 houses on allocated sites. So it is all that the growth in Cromer is already being tempered, if you like, substantially because of the environmental constraint, the AOMB designation of the North Sea. And that will be challenged through the examination process by those who are promoting more development in the town and who are promoting individual site allocations. They will essentially say the council has not done enough in Cromer to identify suitable sites to bring forward the scale of growth which is necessary to address the need in the town. That balance between sort of functional sustainability, environmental constraint, and the need for development has got 1,000,001 variables in it, and there's an element of judgment attached to them all. It is not an algorithm, good old algorithm where you add A plus B and get C. There are lots of variables in there to arrive at the number. I'm broadly comfortable defending the position that we're in, that about 600 houses on allocated sites is about the right level given the environmental constraint. Whether that argument will win through at examination, we will see. But I think it's important to explain that context, that 600 is substantially less than other large growth towns in the settlement. Rightly so, I believe, because it recognises the environmental constraint and the difficulties of finding sites. What I'm going to do, I'm going to press on, I'm going to go through the individual sites rather than break for questions and answers, because I think if we break for questions and answers, we'll probably lose the thread of the sort of overall debate. And it's easier, to be honest, it's easier for me to present it in one go and then take questions at the end. So as I say, ideally we should be looking for sites for around about 600 homes on site allocations. You've already made 2 in principle decisions. So you've accepted the allocation of a site on Overstrand Road. That's locally known as the Harbord Hammond site, or the former golf practice ground. That can accommodate somewhere between 150 and 180 dwellings. You've agreed in principle that that should go into the Regulation 19 plan. You've also agreed a very small site, only suitable for about 20 dwellings, at Cromer High Station. That's a roll forward site from the last plan that's not yet been developed. And those of you on the development committee may know it's subject to a current planning application by the county council, the current owners, to try and secure planning permission. So those 2 sites, which will go into the Regulation 19 plan, collectively can deliver maybe 180 to 200 dwellings, leaving us with a shortfall of about 400. You've also previously resolved in principle to support what I'm going to describe as the Gurney proposal. So that is part of the land, the Pine Tree Farm site that was referred to previously. You agreed to include that for in the region of 300 homes, replacement football club facilities, the Cromer Town Football Club, and a care home proposal. Your residents include that site was subject to final confirmation that safe vehicular access could be formed. And I think I advised you at the last working party, the one before, that that issue has now been resolved. So in effect, the Gurney proposal, as was originally presented to us, could and probably should be included in the plan, but you've not actually made a final recommendation on that, and I'm asking you to do that today. So looking at the options, the remaining sort of in principle that we need to make a decision, hopefully today, on the Clifton Park proposals and on a slightly reconfigured Gurney or Norwich Road proposal in order to get somewhere near those 600 homes. I'm going to say very little about the individual sites, because I say there's a comprehensive appendix in there, but I'll just give you the overall headlines. So the Clifton Park proposal, it's a 8-hectare site in total size. 3 hectares of that are being promoted for what I'll call built development. So that's 55 dwellings and a care home facility. And the current promoters are offering the remainder of the site, 5 hectares, as public open space. As I say, you've considered those proposals before. You've not made a decision. You actually deferred consideration. So as of yet, you've made no in principle decisions about Clifton Park. There are, I know you're very familiar with this, a large number of individual representations. They do appear in the appendix as a comprehensive summary of everything that was said at Regulation 18 stage. It was, I think, by a fairly significant margin, one of the more controversial sites at Regulation 18. I think perhaps with the exception of the large scale growth at North Walsham, had the largest number of individual representations. Those relate to several issues. There's clearly a feeling that the land is important in terms of its landscape impact, i.e. the contribution it makes to the fact that that part of the coast is relatively undeveloped, and people refer to it as the Runtons Gap, the gap between the edge of Cromer and the Runtons, and they attach value to that. There's significant wildlife interest on the site. Those of you, I suspect a number of you have probably been there and possibly walked it at various stages. It's undeveloped scrub grassland, and there is significant wildlife on the site, and there's quite a lot of concern about that. There are other concerns around access and proximity to sewage treatment works that's at the back of the site. And an underlying concern really about the need for growth in Cromer, and given that it's making a relatively modest contribution in terms of absolute numbers of dwellings, 55 dwellings, is it really required? And is that damage a price worth paying once the site is lost? It's lost. So I think that sort of largely encapsulates the sort of representations received. The Norwich Road proposals, so this is what's known locally as the Gurney proposal, did have objections raised at Regulation 18 stage, not as many in terms of numbers, but it wasn't without contention. There is a lot of concern locally about the site being developed. The major constraint on the Gurney proposals is it sits within the AONB, and national advice says essentially don't develop in the AONB, or certainly no significant development proposals in the AONB, unless you can demonstrate it's in the wider public interest. And I might return to that phrase later on, the wider public interest caveat, which is attached to that presumption that you shouldn't develop in the AONB. The proposition that was put several working parties ago now, I think, was that members invited officers or instructed officers to go away and look at alternative sites to the Clifton Park site. So there was a great deal of anxiety about allocating Clifton Park. You asked officers to go away and look at alternatives. We've done that, and the proposition that was alluded to was that there was plenty of land on the sort of west side of Cromer, and couldn't 2 or 3 landowners get together and essentially deliver a larger proposal. We've gone away and negotiated that. There is an agreement between two principal landowners that the Gurney proposal can be enlarged, and we would be comfortable to recommend an enlarged scheme on that side of the town, which potentially will deliver another 150 dwellings. You'll see in the representations, I'm sure you've been lobbied about this. Well, if there's an alternative available, you're making a site larger, why is it that you still need to include the Clifton Park proposals as part of the package of development in Cromer? You can hit that 600 target that I referred to with this enlarged Gurney Cabell Manors proposal and the other sites you've already identified. So in essence, Clifton Park is no longer required as an allocation. And that is absolutely true and accurate in terms of absolute quantum of development. So the propositions which are in front of you, the enlarged Gurney proposal, the Overstrand Road proposal that you've already agreed, and the small scheme of 20 houses which you've already agreed at Cromer High Station, those three sites combined, you'll have done the maths no doubt, add up to 600 dwellings or thereabouts, and would fulfil the obligations we set ourselves under the settlement hierarchy that I referred to earlier on. The additional considerations, and this is why officers continue to recommend Clifton Park, are not about absolute numbers. It is about choice and flexibility, so ensuring that the strategy has a range of choices of sites in it, that we don't run the risk of putting all our eggs in one basket, relying too much on single large sites to deliver all the growth. That's a strategy we pursued elsewhere. So in North Walsham with Fakenham as an example, we've identified some smaller sites to sit alongside the larger allocations as a measure to extend choice, flexibility, and improve the delivery of the plan, particularly in the early years of the plan period. So large sites, you'll know, take many, many years to sort of come to fruition and get their planning permissions and then get developed out. It is a necessary part of the plan making process to ensure a 5-year land supply continuously through the plan period. So it's important we do have some opportunities early on in the plan period, sites that are relatively straightforward to deliver, to keep those numbers sort of coming through the system. The other virtuous aspect of the Clifton Park proposals is in Cromer, it is the only site that's not in the AOMB. The other two large allocations that we are promoting are in the Norfolk Coast AOMB area, and I'm sure, I'll almost stake my mortgage on it, the inspector will be curious at least about the quantum of development that's being proposed in the AOMB and the suitability of alternative sites elsewhere. And we'll ask that question, is the council satisfied it's thoroughly explored a comprehensive range of alternatives, and is it actually necessary to designate sites in the AOMB? The AOMB guidance that I referred to, the National Planning Policy Framework guidance, says in terms, no significant development in the AOMB. And then there's that caveat which I referred to, which says, unless it is in the public interest. And the public interest can be served in lots of ways. So provided we are satisfied when we look at the range of non-AOMB alternatives, that those non-AOMB alternatives can be ruled out, and ruling them out is in the public interest, that is absolutely fine. It's not an uncaveated presumption that the AOMB should be protected at all costs. It's a high bar that the AOMB should be protected unless you're convinced there's no really genuine alternatives that you should consider first. So hopefully that provides a little bit of context about the rationale behind why is it that officers have gone away and negotiated a bigger scheme, the Gurney Cabell Manors proposal, but are still coming back and positively recommending the Clifton Park proposal. The final bit that underpins the Clifton Park recommendation, the officer recommendation, is around the suitability of the site. And what I'm going to say is that we've looked at the sort of what you might describe as the technical constraints to delivery, so road access, drainage, proximity to the water treatment recycling centre and so on. and can't find sufficient reasons to dismiss the site on that basis. In terms of its deliverability, its technical ability to accommodate development, it performs pretty well through our sustainability appraisal process. It's well located in terms of access to services nearby, town centre and so on, not very far away. There are two issues which to some extent require judgments. That is the landscape issue. To what extent does the site contribute towards that visual gap between settlements, and how important is that? And I'm going to add a little bit of flavour to the recommendation. There is a wildlife issue. There is lots of wildlife on the site. It is not a designated wildlife site in the sense that it doesn't currently carry any particular designations. It's not a triple SI or a county wildlife site. That said, I'm about to read a statement from a local resident that suggests there has been some interest from the Norfolk Wildlife Service about designating it as a county wildlife site. And I'm going to modify the officer recommendation to take account of that particular point. So I've been asked to read out a third party representation, a lady who intended to come to the meeting. Unfortunately, she's not available. So I'm going to read the statement on her behalf. Might go a little bit quiet whilst I try and find it on my screen, so you can just bear with me. I'll dig that up. So I'm just going to read through this verbatim. It's a statement from a Mrs. Teresa Cole to us, Planning Policy Working Party, 13th of September. Unfortunately, she's unable to attend the meeting, for which she apologises. I note that initial discussions have now taken place regarding the alternative site, reference C22. That's the Gurney site I referred to. And the landowners have agreed to work together to connect these two sites with a combined capacity to deliver 400 dwellings. It therefore seems a tragedy to jeopardise the Clifton parkland for just 55 homes, which, as we know, could easily end up being future holiday lets, as the area sits right in the middle of the Coast Road tourist hotspot, and will also mean the loss of what is historically considered the Runton Gap. Whilst reading the updated position, am I right in making the assumption that the Cromer number could easily end up being far in excess of around 600 quoted in paragraph 2.1 if the alternative site is included in the Regulation 19 plan? Does this figure include or exclude windfall developments? In the past, the councils refused to permit development on this land, and a letter that North Norfolk District Council sent to the previous developer refused their application for residential development, with reasons given for refusal that, as far as I can see, still apply. So what has changed? Those reasons were the proposed development would constitute a significant residential encroachment into open countryside outside any of the adopted development boundaries, and in an area designated as undeveloped coast and an area of high landscape value. This would result in the loss of open rural character and would undermine an important gap between the settlements to the detriment of the visual amenities of the area. Furthermore, it would adversely affect the setting of the adjacent area of outstanding natural beauty. The refusal highlights the proximity of the existing sewage treatment works and the railway line, giving rise to potential problems of odour and noise nuisance for future residents. The refusal also raises concerns about rainfall excess during storms, when sewers would be at capacity and consequently flooding may be likely. Wildlife impacts. This is an unspoilt open area, should be viewed as a valuable asset to Cromer and East Runton because of the wildlife nature reserve opportunities it could provide, especially as the Wildlife Trust has already shown an interest in looking at this area. A member of the Wildlife Trust has recently advised that the site is very likely to meet the criteria for a county wildlife site, as qualifies as a mosaic of native scrub and acid grassland, and has an important role to play for biodiversity as a piece of undeveloped land along the coast, providing important connectivity between the coast and the habitats inland. Bearing in mind the national concern about the catastrophic decline in wildlife areas, with land like this being destroyed at an unprecedented rate, it seems tragic that Cromer wants to also destroy an area of such wildlife significance for the sake of 55 homes, when alternatives are already in the pipeline. And then she finishes by making some reference to future consultation exercises, which I will respond to directly and don't affect today's decision. So I said I would just make one remark about county wildlife site designation. The officer's report and positive recommendation that the site is allocated is based on an acknowledgement that the site's got lots of wildlife potential, but that it is not designated. So it does not currently carry a county wildlife site designation. It's not a SSSI or any other form of wildlife designation. Given Mrs. Cole's comments in her letter that there appears to be some interest from the Wildlife Services in designating the site, I'm going to caveat the proposed recommendations, the officer's recommendations that the site is included. That recommendation should be subject to confirmation from the County Wildlife Services and County Council that the site does not meet the qualifying criteria to be designated as a county wildlife site. I think it's important that we close that loop off. If it does meet the criteria for county wildlife site designation, then clearly the officer recommendation would change and we would not be recommending its inclusion in the plan. I'm sorry I don't have an answer to that question. I only became aware of that literally just before the weekend, so I've not had the opportunity to pursue it. To date, County Wildlife Services, County Council and others who are consultees on the plan have not raised that issue and have not intimated that they intend to designate the site. But I do think we should be cautious and we should go back and check whether that is actually likely to be the position or not. So the officer recommendation is to include the site in the Regulation 19 plan. And then to finish off my rambling presentation, sorry about that, the Gurney Cabell Manors proposal, as I say, you specifically instructed officers to go away and look at an enlarged site on that side of town. The two parties that we've been talking to, Gurney and Cabell Manors, have both agreed to jointly promote a proposal. That means essentially that the site can be enlarged and can accommodate in the region of 400 dwellings rather than the 250 to 300 that was previously anticipated. And clearly, that being the case, it does ease the pressure a little bit in terms of finding other sites elsewhere and the need to find alternatives. And I may comment on that further if you ask me some questions about it later. So the officer recommendation on the Gurney Cabell Manors proposals that we do endorse that enlarged scheme and we include that as a positive recommendation for inclusion in the Regulation 19 plan. Now, I guess it would help if I put a plan up briefly and just show where those sites are, or unless you all sort of say, don't worry, Mark, we know where they all are. Would it be helpful to put a plan up on the screen? Looks like it. This is where I lose the will to live with my technical skills and ability to do things like this. Somebody nod their head and say they can see that.
Yep.
Can see that.
Yeah, we can see that, Mark. Thank you.
Okay, so when I galloped around those sites very quickly, I'll just refer to these. So this is the Overstrand Road site that you've already agreed to include in the Regulation 19 plan. To say that could accommodate between about 150 and 180 dwellings, depending on density and form and layout and so on. Small site of 20, very uncontentious really, a roll forward from the current plan, subject to current planning application. The Gurney proposals, I must stop calling them the Gurney proposals, really, the Norwich Road proposals, the red area. This is the area that you previously intimated you would be prepared to put in the plan, subject to access issues being resolved. The enlarged proposal, which is embodied in the report, includes this area at the back here, which on my screen I think is C18. By including that additional area in the back there, you would increase the capacity of this overall site up to about 400. key requirements here and features of the allocation would be access limited to Norwich Road only. You know, there's been lots of concern about access going back out onto the Roughton Road here. We would insist that access would be limited to the Norwich Road, and the landscape impact, because it's in the AONB, would need to be mitigated. And I would envisage there's a plantation of trees here where I'm indicating now, quite a thick plantation of woodland, something along the lines of some pretty structural landscaping along this boundary would ensure that this additional area is sort of contained within the elbow of existing development, and consequently wouldn't have significant impact on the AONB designation, subject to that, you know, structural sort of landscaping going in along this southern boundary. And then the Clifton Park proposals, obviously you're very familiar with those. That's the entirety of the 8 hectares that potentially would be available. The proposition is that around 3 hectares of that, largely in this sort of central area here, would be developed, with the remainder being left as green space. I think I've probably forgotten 1 or 2 things, but I'm going to stop there and I think there's public speakers and then take questions. Muted, Andrew.
Sorry, thanks, Mark. Yes, thank you very much for your presentation, Mark. I think you've covered most of the issues there. Can I ask that we now admit Mr. Snowling, Emma, who is registered, as it were, to address the meeting at this particular point?
Is Mr. Snowling's there and ready to speak when you are, Chairman?
Can you hear me, Mr. Snowling?
Yes. Good morning, Chair. I can hear you.
Thank you. Can I just? I think you already know this because we have had some correspondence. You are allowed to speak for 3 minutes, so you will be timed. You may not need the full 3 minutes, but you will be timed on that and asked to finish very promptly after the 3 minute slot is up, as it were. So if you're comfortable, if you would like to go ahead and address the meeting.
Thank you, Chairman and members, for the opportunity to address you this morning. My name is Rob Snowling, Associate Director with Pigeon's Planning and Design Team, responsible for land at Clifton Park. Clifton Park was identified as an allocation in the draft local plan for 90 homes and provision of land for a primary school. However, feedback from the Education Authority and Suffield Park Infant School has indicated that there is no longer a requirement for a new school during the local plan period. As such, the scheme has been revised so that the land for the school has been removed, the number of new homes has been reduced, and increased provision of enhanced public open space is proposed to address feedback on the Regulation 18 scheme. The revised scheme now comprises approximately 5 hectares. Over 60% of the total site area is enhanced public open space, elderly care accommodation, and approximately 55 new homes, including the provision of 35% affordable homes and provision of bungalows. Responding positively to feedback on the draft local plan, the revised scheme includes a large area of open space along the site frontage in order to create an attractive green gateway on the town's western edge, whilst maintaining clear separation between Cromer and the settlement edge of East Runston. Provision of a lower density scheme with the number of new homes significantly reduced means that additional planting can be provided throughout, creating an attractive landscape scheme with extensive areas of on-site green space. The revised scheme incorporates existing public rights-of-way and new footpath links to promote opportunities for informal recreation, outdoor health and fitness, and mental well-being. Enhancement through retention of existing habitat and provision of new green infrastructure will deliver an overall net biodiversity gain, and extensive areas of new tree planting will be provided throughout the scheme, with existing landscape features enhanced to benefit wildlife and provide a series of green corridors. The revised scheme will provide approximately 5 hectares of enhanced public open space and green infrastructure, over 60% of the site, including the provision of allotments to meet an identified shortfall within the town, ensuring the site's green space is publicly accessible for generations to come. The revised scheme includes an elderly care facility to help meet the identified needs for specialist housing in Cromer and the surrounding area, providing self-contained living and associated facilities where people have care and support needs. In conclusion, the proposal that is before members will deliver a high quality and landscape-led scheme, including elderly care accommodation and public access to approximately 5 hectares of enhanced public open space. The scheme has been revised to address comments on the Regulation 18 plan and now includes a significant benefit package that will make a long-lasting and positive contribution to the town. Thank you for your consideration of our scheme. I'd be happy to answer any questions that members may have.
Thank you, Mr. Snowling, for your presentation. Do members have any questions of Mr. Snowling at this stage before we move on to comments from members and questions to the planning officer?
Mr. Chair, it's Councillor Toy.
Yes, come in, Councillor Toy, thank you.
Hopefully it will hold. Sorry, apologies for my video. I'm having issues this morning. Yeah, no, I just had one question, if I may, for Mr. Snowling. He said about biodiversity net gain. We know the government are bringing in a 10% requirement anyhow, which will be needed. But I wondered how he's measuring that. What are the measures now? You know, it's all very well saying we're going to get a gain, but we need to know against what. Yeah, if you could explain how they're going to establish it now and then show us afterwards, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Toy. Mr. Snowling, would you like to respond to that question?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you, Councillor Toy. In terms of assessing the biodiversity net gain of the site, we would use the metric that is proposed by the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. So that is a government-approved metric for assessing the biodiversity of the scheme. So that would be used to assess the baseline condition of the site versus the scheme biodiversity on the site, and we would use that in order to demonstrate a biodiversity net gain. I think one point just related to that is the types of habitat on the site. Mr. Ashfeld referred to the mosaic of scrub and the acid grassland that's present on site. I think it's worth noting that those are habitat types that are relatively newly formed on the site. Whilst we'd look to retain those features as part of the scheme, we also look to provide new areas of mosaic scrub and acid rich grassland on the areas proposed for green infrastructure and enhanced public open space on the site. So that is one of the ways in which we would deliver a biodiversity net gain. And of course, those areas then would be publicly accessible. So we'd be securing the future public access for those areas of new enhanced public open space and green infrastructure for generations to come.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Chairman, if I could just confirm, so the intention is that it's all on site, you're doing no off site?
That's correct. The intention is that it would be, we would achieve biodiversity net gain through on-site enhancements.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and apologies for the difficulty with my video and having to use audio to butt in.
Apologies accepted, Councillor Toy. Thank you very much. What I would like to do now is to throw it open to the floor, as it were. I'm aware that we have the members for East Runton and for Cromer who are not members of the working party on the call. Would either of those members like to indicate now that they wish to address? Just bear with me 1 second. So I'm just going across my screens, as it were. I see your hand raised, Councillor Adams. Would you like to address the meeting?
Actually, Andrew, Wendy was first.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. Yep, Councillor Fredericks. I do beg your pardon. Go ahead.
That's okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mrs. Snowden, can I ask about the elderly care facility? How many placements do you anticipate that would give?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Fredericks. We are looking at a scheme. So our concept scheme is based on the provision of a site that's capable of accommodating an extra care facility with around 60 beds. So it would have self-contained accommodation for around 60 extra care homes, which would be arranged in a building which would have self-contained living accommodation with access to communal facilities as well.
Okay, and also can I ask you, would they have affordable placements as well, or would there be any affordable housing on the site? Because that's a major concern for me, this council and the community.
Absolutely. So there would be affordable provision provided both within, I'll call them the general needs homes, but also within the extra care homes as well.
Do you know the figures on that?
So we would we'd look to provide a policy compliance scheme. So based on the emerging local plan, that would be 35% of the extra care homes would be provided as affordable homes, in addition to 35% of the general needs homes.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Can I just confirm with you, Mr. Snowling, is it 19 dwellings out of 55 are allocated for affordable units? Is that the correct number?
That is correct, based on the 55 homes. But I think it's important to point out at this stage, if the site is allocated, it would be for around 55 homes, and the final number, the precise number of homes to come forward, would be confirmed via a planning application. So to just give you an example, Pigeon are involved in a site elsewhere, where the site is allocated for 150 homes, but following a detailed design process, a planning application has been submitted for 139 homes. So slightly fewer than the overall allocation on the site, and so it would be 35% of the total number of homes on the site. If that number were to be 55, if the planning application was to come forward for 55, then yes, it would be 19 affordable homes. If it was 51 or 52, then it would be 35% of that total number.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for confirming that. Is that okay, Councillor Fredericks? Are you're satisfied with the responses?
Yeah, I am. Thank you, Mrs.
Thank you. Yeah, Councillor Adams, would you like to come in?
Yes, thank you. And I just want to say, first of all, thank you to members and officers for undertaking what I have to say seems a completely unenviable task, possibly the most in the council at this time. So it is appreciated by the rest of us who do not or no longer serve on this committee. Thank you also for taking the time to read numerous items of correspondence from residents in mine and Sarah's ward, but also further afield. It is my understanding that the Clifton Park site has been the least popular in the whole of the local plan process, hence the level of correspondence received by us all. I wanted to draw specific attention to the petition, which was sent to all members of the working party by email yesterday afternoon. This was gathered together over 2 days over the weekend. So I hope you've all managed to sort of catch up with that and read that. You can see that they are objecting to the loss of irreplaceable natural space, rejecting the loss of the physical separation between the Runtons and Cromer, and that the site, they point out that the site has previously been rejected for development, and that the landscape value and the impact of development from locations such as the footpath. So they call upon the site to be rejected. They wish us to consider other sites for the 55 properties, for the 55 houses, I should say, and consider the designation of either local green space or county wildlife site. So I will, of course, ensure that Democratic Services receive the paper copy of that. I've shown you a sheet from that. There are, I believe, 77 sheets here with 122 residents, not just of Clifton Park, but Sandy Lane, etc. Clearly, biodiversity is a big concern here. We've heard about the acid grassland, the wildflowers. There are also lots of berries and lots of evidence of foraging animals. So in my view, it is clearly worth further appraisal, and clearly more valuable to my mind than low to moderate quality farmland in other locations considered for allocation. So this site is not within the AONB, but this landscape is unique within the Cromer locality, if you like. It is in East Runton, and destroying it would certainly be, in my view, at variance with this council's concerns over the environment, and it would simply not be replaceable elsewhere in the locality. Sarah, is clearly likely to want to emphasise the point about the coalescence between the settlements, and particularly how this would be detrimental to East Runton or the Runtons. And as I said, the site is clearly in Runton, and there would not be an appreciable gap between the built-up areas of land west of Clifton Park and on the parish boundary and Wyndham Park, which is a set of terrace properties in East Runton. Lastly, we have the location in immediate vicinity to Cromer water treatment works. And I think despite the best efforts of Anglian Water, this one being, I think, one of the few covered works in the region, strong odour is inevitable when either the doors are open, maintenance works are required, or there are other factors influencing capacity on the site. So I think it's clear, we do this, we store up long-term problems with additional complaints to our environmental teams, and they do occur from time to time. Taking all of these issues into account, it is my view that the relatively modest deficit houses required as a result of not designating this land could instead be provided at a slightly enlarged site south of Cromer without considerably greater impacts on the landscape. And it is my view, it is in the wider public interest to do so. I just wanted to pick up on one little point that was raised in the public session, and that is concerning allotment land. This might not be considered a necessary point, but the town council have already negotiated land elsewhere, so it's possibly not of interest to the town council. I can't confirm on the Runtons. But please do take into account the landscape value here above all considerations. I expect you will find it an aspect that is impossible to overlook here. That's all I wish to say for now. I'm happy to accept any questions, but I see that Sarah's hand is up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim, for your contribution there. If I can turn to Councillor Buttigieg for the Leader of the Council.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yes,
thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning, Mr. Chairman and committee. Obviously, as the local member for the Runtons, I wish to address you. I have to say, you should be very clear in your own minds that this piece of land is actually in the Runtons. It is not in Cromer, and the people of that village and that district, that parish council, take that aspect extremely seriously. I think we need to be very aware that if you look at our coastline and our villages set along the coastline, one of the unique features about North Norfolk is the way our villages along that coastline are divided up. So the only place really that I can think of where the two villages merge or come together, or towns come together, is Beeston Regis and Sheringham. But if you look at the rest of the towns and the villages along our coast, they have areas between them. This is a small area that is between East Runton and Cromer, but it is a very significant area. And I refer you back, if I may, to, you can't see it, I've just seen you can't see it, but it's our landscape character assessment book that goes along with our current local plan. And there are some important comments in there, which I'd just like to read to you. One is, this is the designation for coastal towns and villages and can be found on page 144 of that document. And it says, small but discrete areas of farmland, woodland, heath and other open spaces all contribute successfully to separating and setting the village and towns apart. This is one of the most vital elements in the character of the area. Then goes on to say, the retention of the small areas of open space, farmland, woodland, heath, golf courses, etc., are the essential element which underlies the character of this area. Reductions in this element during the past 70 years have significantly changed the character of the area and effectively eroded it. The level of presence of this element is now critical. There are still some parts of the area where one is not aware of the size and content of settlement, but there are others where it is all too apparent. Maintaining areas where it is possible, West Runton Common and the land, maintaining the physical separation between the settlements, even if there's only on small strips of farmland or open lands, such as Cromer, East Runton, have importance in defining individual settlement character. So we've actually got it on our own document. And I think if we've got it in our own document, we should be listening to what we've said in the past. I think it's really important. We shouldn't forget that were the first council in Norfolk to declare a climate emergency. This area is set near the Fenland Wash area, the wildlife area for biodiversity of the Wash, Greater Wash Special Protection Area, the Overstrand Cliff Special Area for conservation. We need to protect this area. This area is a unique separation, not just of the area, but also for the wildlife in that area. We know these small pockets are important for them. The land at the front of this site, where they are proposing to do what do we call landscaping, has already been developed over the past years. That area is not so important. It's the back area where they actually want to build that is far more important, because that is the area that has been left undisturbed for so long and is inhabited by all manner of creatures and small insects and those sorts of creatures too, which are important for the diversity of our bird life. So there's a lot of reasons. I think the last thing I would like to say is the amount of people that have bothered to contact us. We know as councillors, people don't often contact us unless they feel very strongly about something. There is a large number of people that have lobbied us because they care passionately about this area. And I believe if we are truly representing our local communities, then we should be representing their views and listening to what they have to say to us. We can't always, but in this case, we know that there isn't the pressure on these 55 houses. We know that property makeup can come from other areas, as was clearly explained by officers earlier. And therefore, I would ask the committee to please seriously consider. In fact, I would ask you please to reject this proposal this morning and just stick with the main development and have it all in one area. Thank you very much indeed for your patience this morning.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for that very clear contribution on this particular agenda item. Can I can I invite any questions or comments from any other members at this stage?
Councillor Fitch-Tillett wishes to speak, Chairman, followed by Councillor Heinrich.
Thank you, Emma.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, members. I have to say that I agree 100% with the objectors so far. The last thing I want to see is North Norfolk turning into the South Coast, where all the communities are joined up in one great long stream. I have a question though. Mark, I wonder if you could answer this. I was looking for it, but I couldn't find it. As we are presumably going to provide alternative football facilities for Cromer, does that then allow Cabell Park to be available for the additional 55 houses that we are looking for?
Okay, so I think there's two parts to that question. The Cabell Park site, existing site, as well as being the home of the football club, is designated as an open land area. So that's
Right.
a decision that the authority has already taken, that whether it's got a football club on it or not, it's nevertheless important to the town as one of the green spaces in the middle of the town. Similar to the cricket club and other existing green spaces, we haven't assessed those on the basis of what they're currently being used for, who the tenants are, but the contribution they make to the overall character of the town. So there may be some modest further development potential on the existing football club site, but there would be a significant policy issue to be addressed around the loss of designated open land area. And then the second part, I think it didn't ask it quite in this way, but the significance of the 55 sort of dwellings and the search for alternative sites. If in the event, and this is probably more to do with the decision, which order you take the following decisions in. If the Gurney Cabell Manors proposal does end up being supported, and you've not really discussed that as an option as yet, but if that proposal, the enlarged proposal, does end up getting supported, I'm not personally anxious about the 55 dwellings on the Clifton Park proposal and the need to search around and look for alternatives. I wouldn't get hung up about that. I think if Clifton Park proposal was sort of 200 or 300 dwellings and you didn't support it, we should try hard to replace 200 or 300 houses elsewhere. But it's now 55, and we mustn't ignore the elderly person scheme that's on there as well. The loss of that site, should you choose not to support it, I don't think it renders your plan unsound overall, and I don't think it renders your strategy for Cromer difficult to defend. So I wouldn't then be sat here saying, please go away and find somewhere else to put 55 homes. I don't think that would be necessary.
Thank you for that. There is one other thing I would just like to draw to members' attention to in respect to the coastal erosion zone. Now that currently is to the north of the main coast road. However, there has been significant cliff slumps between Cromer and East Runton, and I would seriously resist any further hard surfacing put anywhere within a few yards, as it is, of the coast erosion zone. That's all I wish to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fitzgerald. Councillor Heinrich and then Councillor Dixon, I believe. Councillor Heinrich.
Thank you, Chairman. Not going to repeat everything that's been said with respect to the Clifton Park site, except to say that I think absolutely spot on, and I fully agree with it, and I really cannot support that site. With regard to Norwich Road, despite the fact that it is in the AONB, I think it's broadly acceptable and provides, with the slightly enlarged site, the housing we need. If we have to accommodate another 55, is there scope to, for example, redevelop the sports facilities of Cabell Park rather than put them within this new development to release a little bit more land for those extra houses, which again negates the need to to build on the strategic gap at Old Clifton Park. Finally, could I ask that we take the recommendations separately, please, so we're absolutely clear on the two sites? Thank you.
Yes, Councillor, that was my intention, to take the recommendations separately and to have a separate vote on the two recommendations. Yeah, we can accommodate that. Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question picks up on the point that the local member has reasonably made with regard to preserving the various gaps that we have between coastal settlements. And I'm just, it's a question really for Mark, I think. Have we at any stage given ourselves any guidance in the development of policy that deals with the maintenance of those separating strips between adjoining settlements? Because I think that will be relevant to our considerations on this matter. If we've already given ourselves some policy guidelines of how we develop policy in that way, then that would be useful to know. The second point, I think, again to you, is whether we have any guidance on how to assess habitat or biodiversity value of sites which don't fall into those formal classifications of triple SIs and so on and so forth. So 2 points there, Mark, please.
Yeah, okay. So the local member very helpfully drew your attention to the landscape character assessment. I must say, my toes curled in embarrassment that I hadn't landed on that and quoted that to you myself, so apologies for that. That landscape character assessment tool replaces the high landscape value designation that the third party referred to in a letter that I read. Remember, we refused a planning application several years ago, a decade or more ago, and it referred to the area of high landscape value. The area of high landscape value were local designations which local authorities had the gift to impose. They weren't national, they were locally derived. And government was concerned that they were being used sort of willy-nilly all over the place to designate, relatively mediocre sort of landscapes. And they were abolished by some ministerial statement probably about 15 years ago now, and replaced with this more sort of subtle tool of landscape character assessment, where you look to establish what were the characteristics of the landscape, what was its sensitivity to development, how would development impact on those important features. And the sections that the local member read out were very germane to this particular site, specifically referenced this site. And that landscape character assessment is embodied in your policies. So the local plan includes policies which require you to take account of the landscape character assessment. It is a supplementary planning guide document. So it is a tool which is used to inform the application of policy. So that policy context is there, Nigel, to give that sort of reasonable weight in the decision-making process. The biodiversity issue is sort of emerging expertise and guidance, really, and everybody's wrestling with this. The Environment Bill will introduce a legal requirement to demonstrate 10% net biodiversity gain. That, again, is incorporated into your emerging local plan, where the policy will require that to be demonstrated by applicants. And on non-designated sites, so these are sites which are not known to have protected species on them, badger sets and great crested newts and so on. The process is the one that Rob Snowling sort of referred to, which is a matrix which essentially you get credits or a score for what's currently on the site. What is a length of hedgerow worth? What is acid grassland worth? What is X worth? And you add up basically a point scoring system. And then your proposal has to demonstrate 10% betterment against another point scoring system which assesses your proposal. Now, that matrix is in development nationally. There are a few sort of pilot examples being run where people are trying to work out precisely what this means. And of course, I think I referred to it at the last meeting, it's very difficult to attribute specific values, such a diverse range of ecological features, if you like, who determines whether a native hedgerow is more important than acid grass? Who decides whether water is more important than something else on a site? And the intention is that government will produce this matrix that we will all comply with, developers will need to comply with, and we will use as the assessment tool. So I suppose I need to say something about the possibility of that 10% being delivered on the site, that betterment being delivered on the site, largely to me falls in this, the fact that 5 hectares of this site wouldn't be developed. So we're not talking about the entirety of the site being built for a housing estate, which is what we often get with development proposals. We've got a proposal here that offers up 5 hectares of land specifically for biodiversity improvements. Now, have I seen a scheme? Have I got that in front of me to consider? Can I say with confidence that 10% can be delivered on this site in the absence of a specific scheme? The answer to that question is no, Nigel, I can't. You know, it's put forward as a proposition by a promoter seeking development on the site, and it is a policy requirement that any planning application would have to demonstrate compliance with in the event that a planning application is made in the future.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Mark. Can I just come back to you on the first matter, just to clarify? The supplementary planning documents that are in play here, the landscape character assessment, were part of a suite of documents which were part of forming the policy position in 2008, as I understand it.
Yeah, so they were an evidence document that we commissioned in part to inform our policy approach to wind turbine proposals in the district. You remember there was a debate about, you know, could we and should we be identifying specific landscape types where we would be prepared to accept small scale and large scale wind turbine proposals. But it's a broader tool than that. It's one used by us and all authorities to categorise, as I say, landscape character type and importantly their sensitivity to development. That's the key difference. It's not just a designation of what's there, it goes on and assesses the sensitivity to change, and that was referred to by the local member earlier on in her submissions about the importance of those gaps and how they might change in the future.
So that document then expresses the policy position that was agreed by this council in 2008. And as I understand it, here we are in 2021, about to decide on a new local plan, which itself will have a suite of supporting documents, which will presumably either reiterate existing policy, supplementary policy positions, or establish new ones, taking into account whatever might be relevant between 2008 and 2021. So my question, I suppose, supplementary question here would be, do you think that there is likely to be any change in the landscape character assessment policy guidance with the new suite of documents that will come out as part of the new local plan?
Okay, so I think the first thing to be clear on is we've already approved and adopted new landscape character assessments. So I'm not sure whether the reference that was quoted earlier on was from the 2008 documents or the more recent ones. I think there's probably an academic distinction because the chances of the landscape having changed and being described in a different way between those two dates is small. So I would imagine the conclusions in the new documents, if that reference was not to the new documents, will be much the same, and I would imagine the content will be much the same. Landscape at the broader level does not tend to change over such a short period of time. If what sits behind that question, is there evidence in the landscape character assessment documents which would support resisting this proposal on coalescence of settlement and landscape grounds? Is that an area where we could argue as an authority? The answer must be yes, Nigel, must be yes.
Thank you for that, Mark. That's very helpful.
Do we have any other members wishing to speak?
Councillor Pearce, followed by Councillor Kershaw.
Thank you. Councillor Pearce.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to come obviously on what has been covered, I note that the council put various points forward as regards Runtons, separation, etc. Well, let's go the other side for a minute. Rowton is separated from Cromer, and yet, you know, we are talking about having a green space, however big, however small, to separate and keep one's identity. That is one point that obviously needs, I think, clarification for both sides. Secondly, I mean, Rowton being a very small village tucked in behind Cromer, already has, in principle, probably got another development down Back Lane for another 30 houses for low cost, mainly people. And then we come to the area of standard natural beauty, space, separation, the impact, highway access, which we've already discussed, needs obviously a lot of looking at. But the most important thing on top of this is this agreement, this proposal has been mooted for some considerable time. And just as there is very strong resistance in East Runton, there is also the same resistance to any development in the area as regards what you now call the Norwich Road development. I do think, however, with obviously, as I've said before, I still maintain that they would grudgingly accept, you know, the development on the Norwich Road because of the housing situation, the needs for future growth, etc. But Rowton Road itself is not, shall we say, ideal for a mass increase of traffic, because coming down towards the other end, the Rowton end, a good majority of it is just slightly wider than single track and no pavement at all. So therefore, can that take the weight of the increased traffic and you know, buses and other things that go through it? I mean, it's something it's got to be looked at. And I do understand Mark's and everybody else's situation. This is quite possibly, without doubt, the most controversial things have got to be looked at throughout the entire area of North Norfolk. So at the end of the day, whichever way we go, we're going to upset somebody. And we're also going to upset an awful lot of people. But I must cast the situation. We are in this side an area of outstanding natural beauty. So therefore, to ask the potential in the future to join Rowton with Cromer and take both sides of the Rowton Road, which is what I can see coming. It's no good saying it's not here today. It will be here. And if we take the other Cabell Manors situation where it combines with what we call the Gurney proposal, we reach the Rowton Road. And it's very easy then to jump across the other side with another proposal in a year or 2, 3 years coming down the road to fill that gap in. So everything that happens, and as said, for East Runton also stands the same for this side. So therefore, and once you get a big development this side, it's very easy to say, oh, well, in the future, we'll dump another one across there. It's the easy option. And don't forget this side also, we've taken the former golfing practice range as a site, and there's the Cromer High Station as well. So I think this side of Cromer, should we accept grudgingly the Gurney proposal, will have more than its fair share of the potential space and development that is required to meet the need for Cromer's future housing. You know, surely those areas, those points that have been so eloquently pointed out for East Runton, stand the same for us as well. The fact that we don't have a water treatment works and all the various other bits and pieces is immaterial. We need a lot of work to be done with roundabouts, etc., to improve the access from the Norwich Road anyway. So the point is, you know, I do ask for careful consideration in the fact is that we can't all dump it on this side. And I would like some clarification on that, you know, for the future, because even the questions that my colleague, Councillor Dixon, has asked still come into play here. This is highly controversial, as Mark said, and we've just got to get it right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. Do you want to come back, Mark, at this stage to Councillor Pearce, or do I take the next question?
Well, I think it just encapsulates the dilemma we're in. You know, there are no comfortable, straightforward options in Cromer. I don't think the coalescence of settlements argument and visual impacts are quite the same on the Gurney Cabell Manors proposal as they are on Clifton Park. To a large extent, the Gurney proposals are sort of screened behind the bungalow development on the main road. The site is visible through a relatively narrow gap in the street frontage as you approach the town. It is designated as the AOMB. Clearly, any large site on the edge of town, you can't say it won't have a visual impact. It will alter the character of that approach into Cromer. We're likely to end up with a roundabout junction, serving a very large housing estate. So, and there will be, I'm sure, significant local objection, backlash, if you like, to the inclusion of that site if you go on and make that decision, because largely people in that area of town have taken comfort from the fact that the council has not to date supported large-scale growth on that side of the town. It appears to have been resistant to it. So this will be a change of position. I think a defensible change of position, despite what Nigel says. I think we can defend that line, and it is reasonable because we've taken the approach we've taken and look carefully at the other alternatives that might emerge. Long-term growth, I think we've got to focus on what's in front of us now, the plan that we are producing, and thankfully it'll be somebody else's task to develop the next local plan in 10 or 15 years' time. Clearly what Nigel is saying there, that once you open up that Pandora's box of large-scale growth to the west of Cromer, it arguably makes it difficult to close that box down in the future and not end up with further development. But that is not what we're considering here. We're considering growth for this plan period, not the next plan period. That'll be a decision for others when we get there.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Kershaw, would you like to come in at what?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, obviously all these developments are contentious, but I think in the wider public interest, the Cabell Manors site seems to make more sense. I think you've been very clear that the initial development would go to the Norwich Road and not across the Round Road. We know the problems with that road. And it's important, I think, to point out that local residents have had the opportunity to comment on these proposals, and in light of the new white paper that may come forward, we're not sure, that right would have been taken away. So I think it's testament to the number of people that have raised objections, and to me sensible objections, that I'd have to go with the Cabell Manors Gurney extended site as the really sensible solution. Thank you.
Thank you for that. If there are no further comments, I'll just summarise.
Councillor Fredericks wants to speak.
Councillor Fredericks.
Yep, that's fine. Over to you, Wendy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank everyone who's spoken today. I'd like to ask a question in relation to the enlarged site, the Gurney and Cabell Manors site. If they were to take more land, would it be the same mix of housing? Do we know what their proposal would be? Are they committed to providing the affordable housing at 35% that we desperately need? Would it be another care home there, or an elderly facility? So there are questions I'd like answered. I guess we don't have the answers to those, but I think in reflection, looking at the objections, and I'd like to thank everybody who wrote in, because people don't usually write in unless they feel very strongly about that, and we are councillors who have to reflect the community's needs and wishes. So I would be in favour of enlarging the Gurney and Cabell Manors development, and I like the assurance and the comfort that the traffic will be directed onto the Norwich Road rather than on the back road. So thank you.
So just to give a little bit of clarity about what you'd be voting on, the allocation is obviously not a planning application, and members will be aware that when you allocate a site and then you get a planning application some years later, there may be a difference between the two for one reason or another. So I can't sit here and give you absolute guarantees about what will end up being on any of these development sites. We'll have to wait until planning applications are made for that. If the site is allocated, so this is the enlarged site, it would carry several obligations, policy requirements. 400 homes would be expressed as the upper limit. It would require the provision of the replacement football club facilities. It will require the provision of an elderly care facility, similar to the one that was being offered on Clifton Park. A 60 bed assisted living or some other elderly care facility would be a policy requirement. And it would carry the standard requirement in Cromer for 35% affordable housing. Now, the reason why I said, we've got to be a little bit cautious about turning those into absolute promises is delivery on the site also requires some significant infrastructure investment in the way of road improvements. Quite a lot of highway infrastructure will be required. And we know there is a requirement for a footbridge over the railway line, which won't be cheap. It will come at a cost. We will specify, and the site will have no boundary to Rowton Road. So there will be no prospect of securing vehicular access out onto the Rowton Road, which is a major concern locally, and that would appear in the policy requirements. So we'd be able to, mitigate the risks, specify the type of development that we want, subject to that caveat that when the planning application comes in, you'll be familiar with the process. People propose all sorts of things and you're left scratching your heads between that tension between complying with policy, which should be your starting point, and delivering what might be seen to be worthwhile development at that particular point in time. That's really all I can say on that, I think.
Can I just raise a query, Mark, with you? We've said that we're going to amend the recommendation to make it subject to confirmation that there is no criteria for designating the public open space at Clifton Park as a county wildlife designation area. Can I ask how long that process will take?
Well, the third party alluded to the fact that somebody had already visited the site and intimated that it would qualify. So I'm hoping and expecting that somebody at Norfolk Wildlife Trust, who are the overseeing body, has looked at this and is familiar, but I don't know who. It should be as simple as a sort of phone call or exchange of emails saying we understand there may have been some interest. What is the current position? And getting written confirmation from them. So I don't expect that to take more than 2 or 3 weeks. It's not sort of delaying the plan submission or anything like that. And it clearly works both ways. If the answer comes back as affirmative, yes, there is some prospect of this being designated and there is a process in hand, then that clearly would bolster the authority's position through the examination process. Should you determine not to include the site, we would then be defending what sounds like a landscape reason and a wildlife reason as being the principal areas of concern that you'd identified. I wouldn't want to pursue a wildlife objection in the absence of some support from the wildlife bodies like the Norfolk Wildlife Trust and so on. I think that would be a prerequisite to defending that argument through the inquiry.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that clarification. So just to summarise, we've obviously, in relation to Clifton Park, got a very contentious designation or allocation. We are grateful as a working party to members of the public who have contacted the working party with their views, very well put in nearly every case. And I thank members for taking the time to consider all the submissions in relation to the Clifton Park C10 site. I think it is important, and I'm grateful to Councillor Sarah Buttigover for introducing the consideration of the landscape character assessment and its bearing upon the site. It leads me to believe or to think that perhaps some form of designation for this open space or this green lung, if you want to call it that, between East Runton and Cromer should perhaps have been already attended to at some point. It just perhaps seems to have been something that's not really being given that much attention to as a landscape area and a characteristic between the two settlements. So having said that, I personally know which way I'm going to vote, and I would like to move to the vote now. And I would suggest, unless anyone has objection to it, that it is a roll call vote. Do I have any objection to that? I don't see any.
Yeah, sorry. Can I? I don't want to complicate matters. I think we ought to really take the Gurney Cabell Manors proposal first and reach a definitive decision on the authority's view on that proposal, because I think it is germane then to what you might do on the Clifton Park proposal and the advice I offered about whether the Clifton Park proposal is significant in terms of numbers. I say that because in the event that members don't support the Cabell Manors Gurney proposal and don't support the Clifton Park proposal, which is still an option on the table, then I've clearly got to advise you about what to do next. So I think it would be prudent to take the enlarged Gurney proposal first, because I think that does colour what you do on the other site.
Councillor Pearce wishes to speak as well, Chairman. He's been waving his hand for a while.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Emma. Councillor Pearce, could you summarise?
Well, I wasn't going to summarise, Mr. Chairman. I had my hand up before you yourself started to summarise, because obviously coming what's going to happen. Okay, I'm not trying to preempt any vote, but I just want the situation to be understood. Maybe we can get some guidance from here. It might help the situation. We've all said that there's going to be an awful lot of work required to make access from the Norwich Road for the proposed Gurney project site to make it viable so that we can close off Roughton Road. Are we in a position then to stipulate that the road works and all the other rectifications that need to be done to allow that access to that site are done before a house is even thought about or started to be turned over? Because we all know what is going to happen and what does happen with developers. Nobody wants to build the road because it costs too damn much. And you've got the very same situation being argued most severely in North Walsham, which is our other large growth town area. And the situation is there, we're all still talking about putting the roads in first. Now, we know that for X number of houses, should it be grudgingly accepted, and I'm still going to stick on that, is the fact that the local community would want to see that work done first. Because if we're going to leave it to the developers or leave it as the way it's always been done, we're going to have an intolerable mess. So I've got to ask those questions. And I think, Mr. Chairman, in order to help clarification, as so diligently put by Mark, I think we need some clarification on that point too. Thank you.
Chairman, if I could just comment before we move on as well. I don't know whether Councillor Pearce has declared an interest at all in relation to the site, possibly relating to where his place of residence is. I don't know whether you want to clarify that, Councillor Pearce, before we move forwards and take the vote.
Thank you for that. I don't have any pecuniary interest. I have said in the past that I was once, several years ago, approached by Mr. Cabell Manors, and I wouldn't entertain any discussion. I know that where I live, I do live on what is all part of what was Cabell Manors land, etc. I can't help where I live, but I've always tried to be objective in my thoughts and, all right, 100% honest, because I would not entertain any discussions with Mr. Cabell Manors on his future projects. And he did try, as I say, a couple of years ago to have a discussion with me, which I would not entertain. And I want everybody to know that my feelings, and I said, I come back to it. I think the residents would grudgingly accept some work on the Gurney proposal. But this work has got to be done in conjunction with down plans and procedures. And I think Mr. Cabelmanners knows that I do not want to, I don't wish to see any movement across the other side of the Rowton Road. And my position on that has not altered one iota. So thank you for the reminder, but I don't have any pecuniary interests, and I certainly don't have any financial interests in Cabelmanners' operation or his land. Where I live is just something that is where I live, and I will always be over and above board, honest and fair.
Okay, yep. Thank you, Nigel. Does that satisfy your query, Emma?
To some extent, Chairman, I think your property does count as a pecuniary interest. So, potentially any impact from, the site being allocated could impact on Councillor Pearce, the value of his property and so on. But it is a decision for Councillor Pearce to come to, whether he feels comfortable voting on it. I flagged it up as something that he may want to consider, but I will leave that with Councillor Pearce now and yourself as Chairman, whether, around that judgment. But I think Councillor Pearce has made his view plain. So, and obviously it will be recorded in the minutes and on the live stream.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Emma. Are you satisfied with that, Councillor Pearce?
Yes, as I say, I have no arrangements at all with Cabelmanners. I have no arrangements with the Gurney proposal to accept. So please understand me. I understand and thank you for that. What happens, because the committee proposes a proposer which is then taken forward to Cabinet as one person, I don't have any changeover. I don't have any way to influence any decision, and I wouldn't want it that way. I really wouldn't want it that way. However, thank you for raising it, but I come back to my previous points as regards the roads and the works. That question.
I'm just going to refer, if I may, to you, Mark, just to come back on the point of the infrastructure and what might be the highways works and under a planning agreement, etc.
Okay. So the scale of development that's now on the table, 400 dwellings or somewhere of that sort of ilk, will require a minimum of at least 2 points of access. You won't be allowed to service the entirety of that development for 1 point of access. Those 2 points of access will have to be to Norwich Road. And it's highly likely, I'll use the words highly likely, that one of those points of access will need to be a roundabout. To date, there's been discussions about the location of said roundabout and whether it's close to the rail bridge or at the other end of the line of bungalows on the Norwich Road. The one which is furthest out of town so far has been undeliverable because the two parties have not been in agreement with each other. Now they are in agreement with each other and they are promoting a joint scheme. A roundabout junction at the North Walsham end of those bungalows is back on the table and is the preferred highway solution. That's where they would prefer a roundabout to be. As to delivery, the typical thing that happens is, the developer will get the scheme away. The first 20, 30 houses, relatively modest, quite often served by temporary sort of access arrangements. They don't spend huge amounts of money on a roundabout until it's required. But there will be a trigger point associated with the planning application which require the phased delivery of the roadwork. So the Highway Authority will determine that prior to occupation of the 100th dwelling, a second point of access has been provided. Prior to occupation of 150 dwellings, X will have been done to ensure that the development is built out in a sensible way and served by the necessary infrastructure. So you can be assured it will happen when it's required in terms of highway safety and convenience. That roadwork will be there, and those triggers are linked to occupation of a specific number of homes. They're tied to people moving in, essentially.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Right. So the recommendation from Mark is to take the Norwich Road recommendation for site allocation first. So this is to include in Reg 19 approximately 400 dwellings, sports pitches, elderly persons accommodation, open space and sporting infrastructure in accordance with a comprehensive master plan and phasing agreement. That's the recommendation. Can we please organise the vote, Emma, on a roll call basis?
Yes, Chairman. Members, I'll call out your names in alphabetical order, and if you could just indicate whether you're voting for, against or abstaining for the recommendation as just read out by the Chairman. So starting with Councillor Brown.
For.
Councillor Dixon.
For.
Councillor Fisher.
For.
Councillor Fitch-Tillett.
Abstain.
Councillor Fredericks.
For.
Councillor Gay.
For.
Councillor Grove-Jones.
For.
Councillor Heinrich.
For.
Councillor Kershaw.
For.
Councillor Mancini-Boyle.
For.
Councillor Pearce.
I'm abstaining at this stage.
Councillor Toy.
I'm for.
So that is 10 in favour and 2 abstentions, Chairman, so that has passed.
Unmute, Andrew.
Thank you, Richard. So we move to the second recommendation, and this is that the land at Clifton Park, which I think is C10, is allocated for approximately 55 dwellings, elderly care accommodation, public open space, subject to confirmation that it does not constitute a county wildlife designation and doesn't meet the criteria for such designation, I think is perhaps, or words to that effect, Mark, I think it sums it up. Right, so if we can move Emma to a roll call vote for this recommendation as well, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Again, members, I'll just call out your names in alphabetical order. So starting with Councillor Brown.
Against.
Councillor Dixon.
Against.
Councillor Fisher.
Against.
Councillor Fitch-Tillett.
Against.
Councillor Fredericks.
Against.
Councillor Gay.
Against.
Councillor Grove-Jones.
Against.
Councillor Heinrich.
Against.
Councillor Kershaw.
Against.
Councillor Mancini-Boyle.
Against.
Councillor Pearce.
I'm still thinking, but I think I'd have to go against.
Councillor Toy.
Against.
And that is unanimously against the recommendation, Chairman.
Thank you, Emma, for your help with that. And thank you, members, for your debate this morning. That's been extremely helpful. So moving on to item 8 on your agenda papers, any other business discussion with the chairman. Under item 4 above, I don't think we have any. Item 9, no cause to exclude the press and public, and therefore no exempt matters arising from the agenda under item 10 and any exempt business. We have none, I believe, under item 11, Emma. So that, I think, concludes the meeting. I apologise for not offering a break at 11:30, but I thought perhaps it was worth just ploughing on to bring about the vote as quickly as we could. So thank you very much for everyone's attendance this morning, and I will close the meeting.